Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Welcome back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-back conversation where we talk all things cannabis from U.S. MSOs to Canadian LPs, products and market analysis through the lens of data. My name is Cy Scott with Headset. I am joined, as always, by Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the High Rise.
And we have another very special South by Southwest Poolside episode today. And today, a couple of very special guests as well, with Tahira Rehmatullah, founder and CEO of Commons, and Jacqueline Bennett, Chief Growth Officer of Commons. Thanks for joining us today, guys.
Happy to be here.
Yay!
Yay! We thought this was going to be karaoke, though.
Yeah. Later.
Okay.
This all just turns into a karaoke rig.
That's what I thought. I've been practicing.
Okay.
Yeah, those are the Poolside after hours sessions. We'll get you on those next.
Yeah.
So obviously we've known you guys forever, I feel like. But why don't you tell the listeners, how you both started in the industry?
Sure. So I'll kick it off just because I'm close to the mic. So this is Tahira. I started in 2014. I'd been looking at cannabis just personally because when I was in business school in 2012 to 2014, my grandfather was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And so, as many people do, start looking at alternative treatments. And my mother, of all people, very quickly came across cannabis in her late night Googles. And one day she texted me and my younger sister, and all she said was, "Do you know where to get to marijuana?" And my sister called me immediately, and she was like, "Do you think this is a test?" I was like, "I think we're a little too old for this, but let's see what mom's up to." And it was just eye-opening for me. That was 2013. I was graduating in 2014, and as graduation was approaching, I was more distracted in, my grandfather's illness, and he ended up passing away in February, and I just so happened to be contacted by another person we know and love, have known for a long time, Sam Bulow, who recruited me to Privateer Holdings, and the rest is history. I thought it could either be the shortest job I have, but I'd finally have interesting stories to tell, or it could be the beginning of something that I probably for the first time in my life felt like I really cared about and wanted cannabis to be more available to people, saw what it could have potentially done for my grandfather had we had access to it, but we didn't have access, and that changes everything. So here we are.
Here we are.
My story it started really in 2018. So I was still working at my beloved job at JP Morgan and got some exposure to the cannabis industry through a transaction we were working on. So actually we were selling beverages and more, and I had the wild idea to talk to cannabis funds. Actually, Emily, you were on my list of outreach back in the day. I think I contacted you through LinkedIn. And as we thought about Canadian operators and US funds wanting to get the real estate that this company had. So that was a creative idea at the time to drive valuation, but what it really led me to was this amazing emerging category and industry and people. And then I met an individual who also had a spin on his fund, or at least that's what he shared with me at the time, that was focused on supporting mental illness, which has always been a big interest of mine. So I was ready to leave Wall Street, and I was contemplating or deciding between two roles, and one was diving into the cannabis industry, and one was to go into a variation of JP Morgan but with some cannabis in it. And so I took the full plunge early 2019 and went into cannabis to fit in.
Regretted it ever since.
And we cry about it every day.
We consume cannabis because we are in the cannabis
Exactly.
industry.
At least we know what the antidote is now.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's where you started, but now you both are working on Commons. So let's hear a little bit about what Commons is.
Yeah, so Commons really was a long time coming. I mean, I'd worked on an early brand that some of you are familiar with called Marley Natural, which at the time, was prepackaged cannabis was a new concept, and bud tenders told us we were crazy. But just going through that process, which was very early in my career coming into cannabis, just thinking more about brand building in the space and how you're reaching consumers. And with that one in particular, obviously we're working with Bob Marley's family. It's a Black Icons brand that was probably it was a little too early for cannabis, but also just the layers of debate and trying to make sure that you're reaching the right audiences, doing justice to the communities that have both been impacted by cannabis, but also are massive, like Bob Marley fans, like advocacy. All of these things are wrapped up into it. And after that brand and working with other brands, helping them get to market, I started to see kind of a bit of a formula start to develop that I didn't love, where it was targeting predominantly, I think, white, coastal, more luxury consumers, and there wasn't really enough conversation with communities who've traditionally been involved with cannabis, or even those who are not traditionally involved who could really benefit from it. So I even think back to my own mother, like, who's trying to talk to her, but where would she even get the education or the access if not for me? And so it was a bit of a long time coming, building up to it, and it came in through conversations with our primary investor and incubation partner, Thrive Capital. So with a former colleague of mine from my hedge fund days who headed up incubations there, we just started thinking about, what is that white space? And for me, it kept kind of going back to how are we getting more people engaged in the space, giving them the opportunity to participate in ways that maybe are not that easy. Not maybe, they're definitely not that easy, right? It's expensive it's hard, it's complicated to get into the space. And so over time, started looking more at the peer-to-peer model, which has its own issues over time from, direct sales, MLM, all the different ways that some of those models have been poorly utilized to benefit, a small number of people. But there's a lot of power in that as well, in that education and being able to really communicate one-to-one with people. And sometimes I would joke that cannabis is the oldest peer-to-peer transaction in history. So let's just take it back to where it started. Like, you got a guy, we want to be your guy. And we started with CBD because even though it is pretty saturated, there is a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion by a lot of people. I think the number one question we still get is, will it get me high? And obviously all of us sitting here, we know so much about it. We know kind of the ins and outs, but most people don't know that. So that alone felt like a good place to start, especially with this peer-to-peer model. And then evolve from there, introduce other minor cannabinoids, eventually THC. And then we also think about just broader plant-based medicine when we think of what's happening in psychedelics, functional mushrooms, all of that. It's just more of creating that access point and also dialogue for people who can help you, essentially coach you through it.
Yeah, I think so for me, I'm a big fan of Tahira's, and we had been...
Who is not?
So I was like, what are you doing? I want to come and do it too.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
So we had been working together on some investments and advisory through a firm we founded in early 2020, and I was watching the sort of evolution of Commons, or it sort of starting to form, and the more, just understanding, having been in the industry for the period that I've been in, and seeing the, coming from a CPG background to a degree, so knowing that there was a lot of significant room for improvement in how brands were being built and how the relationships with the consumers were being developed and nurtured. So from a business perspective, it makes perfect sense to have a distribution model that solves a lot of the major issues and barriers for brands in general. And I think the other piece, because we're so nascent in terms of form factors and formulations and even need states for the power of cannabinoids and plant medicine, broadly speaking, it's also that big piece that excites me is the feedback loop. So we sincerely get to innovate in partnership with the community, because we can respond by innovating around product types and formulations based on what we're hearing and what's sort of who's speaking the loudest around what they would love to see come to market. So I think that is another really amazing part around this peer-to-peer model, is that real-time feedback is real, and we get to sincerely innovate and develop our products with our community, with our ambassadors, with our customers, and sort of everyone around the table. And that to me is really exciting, particularly as you think about women's wellness. Mm-hmm. So we went down a path of looking at some femtech solutions back in 2020, and the idea of being able to accelerate some of that innovation and work with great R&D teams who are the leaders. I think I heard you, Emily, talking about Israel and some of the developments happening there, which is really exciting. So with this model, being able to identify those who are leading in certain areas around with R&D and formulations and cannabinoids, and particularly for the female reproductive system, being able to bring that to market and commercialize it and provide access, and also give others the opportunity to share it with their community, is really exciting.
Yeah, I think that you're hitting this at a really, really interesting intersection where women are starting to really want to take more control of what goes on, especially around their sexual health, because it's been so ignored for so long. I mean, I'm really good friends with both of you, and I feel like we've had conversations about how we feel like we've been misled by our own primary care providers, our women's health doctors, and just totally underserved, and kind of like it feels to me like a very reactionary field. And so women that I know are trying to get around this kind of status quo of neglect that we really have. Not even neglect, it's almost like abuse in a way, because it's like so bad that it's unhealthy and has long-running repercussions on our bodies. And so I think cannabis is really interesting. And when you were talking about the community and education, I get questions from my female friends, especially the ones who are in their childbearing years and they have children, they're breastfeeding, they're going through this, and they're like, what's the impact of cannabinoids, even if it's just CBD? But there's so much confusion around it. And I myself, even though I'm steeped in this industry, I feel like I'm still on a discovery path, and I want to make sure that they feel safe and that they're making choices that they feel comfortable standing behind. And yeah, so I think it's a really important platform that you guys are focusing on, and that you're focusing on that demographic in particular is one of the like tips of the spear, I think.
Yeah, and a big part of it too, I mean, this is part of what we've talked about is, I mean, there's so much about ourselves that we learned in more recent years. Like I got my eggs frozen a couple of years ago, and I learned things about my body that I was like, shouldn't I have known about this when I was like 10 years old? And
yeah, we were just talking. I think you taught me something the other day.
Well, and what I taught you, and I taught somebody who recently who's like in her mid 50s that as women we're born with all the eggs that we're ever going to have. And like my mind was blown when I was sitting in this. And when I was saying this to her, that I was like, oh, this is something I learned just a couple of years. She goes, I never knew that. And she's a nutritionist and a health coach in different areas, and she didn't know that. And I was like, this is embarrassing that we don't know that, but we're not taught a lot.
No, we're taught nothing.
Unfortunately. And I think what we get excited about in this type of model, and as Jacqueline said, like the feedback loop, but what we want to do is we want to aggregate those use cases, those conversations, and then serve them back out to people in streamlining, dosage or format or use cases. And a lot of groups are trying to do this too. And there's not a one model that's like superior to others, but this is just direct customer talking to the brand and us talking back. And so we really get excited about that part of it. And we hear things about our products. People will share what their use case is, and we're like, we didn't even think about using it for that. Thank you for sharing that. And like that's the type of information that you go into product development, you think you know what the boxes that product's going to be used for or how, and then people tell you new things about it. And just the fact that we can get that information back and use it, I think can be really powerful.
Yeah, remember I used the sports stick on my injection site for the COVID vaccine. It helped. I was like sleeping on my left side in no time.
Well, you're welcome.
I mean, we hear stories where people have had arthritis, elderly people have had arthritis in their thumb for decades, and they've used everything that you can imagine, and then they apply the balm and it's gone in 10 minutes. And these are, I mean, they seem almost too convenient, the testimonials, because they're so reinforcing but also motivating, because you're really sincerely helping people, and that's very satiating. One little thing that I wanted to share that made me so embarrassed about how little I knew is that tampons don't require FDA approval.
Yeah, that
when I learned that, I was like, they go inside our body. I didn't think about that.
So I knew all this information.
Yeah, come on. Where have you guys been? I could have.
More motivation.
No, I mean, just a few years ago, I really started leaning in on my supply chain of those products, where I was like, I need pure cotton. That other shit is dead. Do we swear on our podcast? I'm swearing today.
It's a children's podcast.
Yes, exactly. So one of the things I wanted to dig in a little bit on is that, we track things like through the legal cannabis supply chain that's state to state and all the rest of it. But we've also been watching, and you've done a bit of work on CBD on the broader level. So I'm curious where you think we are with CBD, because I feel like we had a moment with CBD where everyone moved fast and broke stuff because they were just like, throw it on the shelf. I remember I was living in New York in 2019, and it was like $75 tincture of absolute trash, and like with It was so sketchy, and you'd see it in the bodegas or in the gas stations. And I remember I went to one coffee shop and I asked them to put a drop in because they were like, CBD drops in your coffee, and they put it in. It absolutely ruined my coffee. It was disgusting.
And they're like, that'll be $35.
Yes. And I was like, and I like went back in there and I was like, where did you get this oil slick from? Like, what is this garbage you just ruined my $35 coffee with? But so where do you think we are kind of in this trajectory of where CBD lives, and what other things are you kind of playing with on the cannabinoid?
So unfortunately, I think we have a bit of a way to go with CBD just from a regulatory standpoint when you think of what the FDA has actually given clear guidance on. The biggest issue is we don't have clear guidance. And, you know, topicals are fine, but ingestibles are big question marks. Some would be further on like, okay, they're not legal at all. And some people are like, they're like in that gray area. I always lean on what my legal counsel says. And, you know, the biggest thing is there is enforceability, or there has been enforcement, but it's really against those who are like very blatant about what they're doing, making claims that you should not be making, which is like marketing 101, right? Across cannabis, CBD, anything, supplements, like you really have to think about what you're putting on there. So not making those claims, and then also being clear about what it actually is. And some people are saying it's cannabis. Some people are saying, you know, that there are other things that are in it or not. And that's where the challenges really come in. But if you are, I think, doing the right things, like understanding the supply chain, doing all the testing, third-party testing, you know, being very clear on what the ingredients are, then you're really not like in the crosshairs, or at least that's what we're banking on. At the same time, it's just not that clear. And granted, there's a lot going on. This has not been maybe the priority for regulation, but it's also one of those things that leaves the industry in a little bit of a state of limbo, because like we see in cannabis, right, until there's like a clear ruling on it, it's just like anything could get yanked from under you at any point in time. I mean, CBD, let's be real, right? It's legal. It's hemp derived. It's legal. Like, they're not rolling that back. But Emily, to your point, 2018 Farm Bill finally passed, and all of a sudden it was just everywhere. And that was a reason too for thinking about something like Commons. It's like, you can get CBD at a gas station, in a bodega. They will put it into your drinks at Soho House. You can get it at Sephora. Like, you know, go all the way up to the luxury retailers. And how are you supposed to know what the difference is? And what is considered good or not? Is it like the green, goopy, planty stuff is the good stuff or not? Who knows? And that's part of what we're trying to explain too. And like, there's a difference between isolate and full spectrum, but what is that? Yes. Why does it even matter? You will have people on all sides of the table saying like, it's only worth it if it's full spectrum, or it should only be broad spectrum, or, you know, there's just so many opinions. And so giving the information we think is really important. But from a regulatory standpoint, I mean, unfortunately, I think it's just gray, but we come from cannabis. So we're like, well, this isn't so bad. This is more clear than other things we've done.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is in the agency's defense, in a way, is that they've also been waiting for organized data to be presented with a very specific ask of what do you actually want us to opine on, and whether it's deciding whether it's governed or it's categorized as a supplement versus food and beverage, etc. So now there are organizations who are impartial, so not your operators who have they're incentivized for their own sort of bottom line, but you have nonprofits who are coming together in a very reputable and sophisticated way and trying to pull together data that can be interpreted by the FDA, and so they can then move forward and actually have clear policy. So it's a little bit of a two-way street. So I'm part of an organization called the Council for Federal Cannabis Regulation. I always get it. CFCR, that's the acronym, which was founded by a powerhouse of a woman named Sherry Orlowitz. She started working on the concept a couple of years ago, and I've sort of watched it from concept, where there was an idea that she felt was necessary, and then she's managed to corral dozens of people who are working for the most part on a voluntary basis, very sophisticated. So it's a formation of 4 committees, a science committee, business committee, DEI, and one other, government relations. And so bringing in people from outside the industry, so whether it's C-suite from major CPG, pharma, scientists who've been working in-house at the FDA, and I would say they've now had their first couple of meetings with the FDA and actually making what as far as I can observe, the most progress that is actually real, and having a dialogue with the FDA that's going to lead to some sort of conclusion. So that's exciting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we take a lot of crap. I mean, yeah, I think this is a theme this week of us losing patience when things don't happen as fast as we want them to. But we were just talking last night with Vivian from Cowen about, I remember in the beginning of the pandemic, they had Gottlieb on, who was the former chair of the FDA, and he was articulating that not just the pandemic, what was going to happen with it. And I got to give it to him. He called the shots pretty close to what did end up happening over the course of the last 2 years. But one of the things he pointed out was just how this was also going to back up things at the FDA, like drug approval processes, all of these different new procedure. And so many things. And then I think about where our government prioritizes things. And I'm just like, get in the queue, everybody. I mean, they're still trying to figure out the e-cigarette space and get PMTA status done on that. And that's, as far as they're concerned, a crisis of the youth. So, anyway, it's just an interesting time while we watch how this plays out.
Well, Tahira, Jacqueline, thanks so much for joining us here at the South by Poolside session. Where can people learn more about Commons?
You can go to www.commons.co. We're also on Instagram at commons_co. Am I missing anything? Oh, yeah, you can find us on LinkedIn, too.
And we'll soon be dancing on TikTok, apparently. If that's what the kids tell us we need to be.
The youths tell us that. We don't know. I still don't know what TikTok is.
We're like, tick, 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 what?
I don't think we have a TikTok yet at Headset, so.
Okay, well, when we learn how to do it, we'll teach you how to do it.
Or vice versa. Yeah.
Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.